I would glance once at her face and shut my eyes. Then I would set down on paper the lines which I had selected for my purpose. This unorthodox method produces a painting which is not just a faithful description of its model, but even captures her departed spirit. Surprisingly, it is also identical to the painting on the ancient clay pot from Ray, to the point that, and I quote again, there is not an atom of difference between the two. Notice now, the new painting is not a reproduction of the past, from the ancient one, but a virtual double. Although the two paintings are executed in different media, one on paper, one on glazed clay, they are identical, as if both are the work of a single artist. This particular twist in the story has two implications. First, it conveys a profound sense of cultural continuity within the Persian literary tradition. Secondly, it establishes the equal status of modern art vis-à-vis the classics. The likeness between the two pictures implies that the adoption of modern techniques and aesthetics does not necessarily constitute a break with the legacy of the past, as long as the artist preserves the essence of his cultural heritage. Hedayat seems to be arguing that the essential features of a literary culture are to be found in its distinctive themes, motifs, symbols, and allusions. The perpetuation of these features once bridged the chasm between the pre-Islamic and the classical art of Persia. The same approach, then, will bridge the gap between traditional and modern art and literature. Significantly, both pictures capture with equal success the magical glance of the elusive ethereal girl from the painter's vision. In other words, the modern artist can convey the cultural archetypes as effectively as did his ancient counterpart. Modern art is indeed the legitimate successor of the classics.
I'm going to start from an anecdote which is very closely related to what I want to say. Around 15 years ago, I had a meeting with Edward Said in Paris, later on, I wrote a piece on his conception of the intellectual as outsider. And in the conversation that we had about Iran and Iranian intellectuals, he asked me who did I think that portrayed more his theory of the exilic mind, the intellectual as the exilic mind and as an outsider. And I told him, well, I think that if there is one person that we can talk about as being an exilic mind and an intellectual in the same sense as Said talks about, is certainly Hedayat. And now I just wanted to share a few thoughts with you about this, how I perceive Hedayat as an outsider and why he's an outsider. First of all, I think that this Hedayat's exilic mind, if we can say, or Hedayat as an intellectual who's an outsider, this attitude emerges mainly in his homelessness, in the idea that, for example, somebody like Esaqpour, who has worked on him also, he talks about this in-betweenness of Hedayat. He's somehow in between. His homelessness, but also a way that he mediates between cultures. As I said in the movie, I think that he's a flaneur in the same way that Walter Benjamin takes this French word and works with it, because Hedayat is somehow between different cultures, and he knows about these cultures that he's talking about, but also about these cultures that he's criticizing. Now, I do believe that he has this exilic flânerie. I think that he has a kind of a, if we want to talk about him as a modernist, as I have written about it previously, I think we have to talk about the secular modernism again, in the same sense that Edward Said does talk about it. Now, very quickly, I think that if I had to talk about this conception of hedayat as an outsider, I can say very quickly how I do believe that in different conceptions he is really an outsider. First of all, hedayat is a critique of violence. I'm not saying he's a nonviolent in the same way I portray nonviolence, but he's a critique of nonviolence, and Homa Katuzian says in the movie, he has written about it, and especially in his article, in his essay, Man and Animal, we see that hedayat is very critical towards the way that human beings treat animals, but it goes beyond that. So he's also already an outsider in the way that he's criticizing violence at his time. He's against, as we see in his letters and as we see in the way he portrays Iranian society, he is as if he was alive today and he was writing about the corrupted society of Iran today. He's against lying. We know that our society is one of the societies in today's world which lies the most. Lies to the others and lies to itself. And so hedayat actually is very interesting for me, so as a person who is so much against lying, and he's so much an outsider in comparison with so many other intellectuals that they openly are lying somehow to others. Now, since we are comparing hedayat with the intellectuals of his time, one of the points which is so interesting about hedayat, who is against violence, who is against lying, is that he's against ideology also. He's not following any ideology. Actually, he does not want to be ideological. In my meetings with Bozorg Alavi, I did a documentary when I was a student in France on Bozorg Alavi. I asked him about hedayat, whom he knew very well, and I said, why didn't hedayat become a member of the party, despite the fact that he has so many friends to the party actually? And Alavi told me he was never interested by ideology. He felt ideology depressed hedayat. Actually, I can say it this way: ideology depressed hedayat. But at the same time, that hedayat is somehow outsider to the ideology of his time. At the same time, he's outsider to the conservatism of his time, not only in his literary, I would say, criticism and in his literary style, because he's also very different from Kazemi, he's different from Hijazi, he's different from Nafisi. His style is so different, and his perception and his conception of literature and art is also very different. So somehow we see this aspect of hedayat being as an outsider in all aspects of hedayat's literary work, in aspects of his intellectualism, and also I would say in his approach towards the concept of modernity. Now, very quickly, I just wanted to portray, go back to one of these ideas which we do talk about also in the movie, and especially Dr. Katuzian and Nasser Pakdaman, they do talk about it. And this is, I think, very important, and in the same way that hedayat is a flaneur of modernity and he's experiencing modernity. And to tell you the truth, I think that his suicide also is an experience of modernity. I think that hedayat's suicide is not a suicide in traditional form. To say it very crudely, for those of us Iranians who believe in martyrdom, hedayat certainly would not for an instant believe in martyrdom. So his way of dying also is not an ideological way of dying, is not certainly a Shiite way of dying, it's not necessarily even a heroic way of dying. And Nasser Pakdaman quoted Akhto, which was wrongly written in the subtitle because it was written Arthur, is Antonin Artaud. And Antonin Artaud, as you know, I mean, conception of hedayat is exactly like Artaud, because Artaud also talks about suicide, but in a modern way, actually, and it's an experience of modernity. And so I do believe that we can say, of course, there is depression and everything else, but we can say that this is an attitude towards death in the same way that hedayat has an attitude towards life. And